That's just great. We just have all kinds of things going on. Is that any better? Is that any better? All right. Thank you, Tommy Guns 44. I did the old unplug and plug it back in, and apparently that got it done. Folklore, thank you as well. John, thank you as well. Again, it was unplug the cord, the microphone cord, and plug it back in. So let's just start all over again. We're here. We've got 2 days to go until Notre Dame and Ohio State. We've got a couple different people who are going to be joining me. We're going to be doing a breakdown of Ohio State coming up in just a few minutes with Chase Brown from 11warriors.com. We'll get some of his thoughts on the Buckeyes. And Jimbo says Michigan blows, and apparently so does my microphone cord. So thank you very much. We are ready to go. I saw a couple comments as I was checking in. John, playing Ohio State week 1, huge advantage. Deep throws on offense, relentless pressure on defense. Ohio State not prepared for new look Notre Dame. I agree with that. I think that obviously the book that everyone got on Tyler Buchner last year was this is a guy who's going to run all the time, but he was not a full-fledged quarterback last year. He was a package guy who was out there for a change of pace. And, the biggest questions for me, his accuracy is going to be a question, even though everything I saw says he's a pretty accurate quarterback. What's that look like under real pressure? That's going to be a thing. How does he, make the reads? How does he do under pressure? All those different things. Those are all going to be answers that Tyler Buchner is going to have to answer. Kenny says he thinks the biggest key to winning the game is being dominant, running the ball. That's what Oregon and Michigan did last year. That is very true. And that is also why Jim Knowles was brought in to run the defense, new defensive coordinator that they have. So we'll see exactly, which side of that pans out. But a lot of people scoffed when Marcus Freeman said, run the ball and stop the run. But those are two age-old keys to playing football, regardless of what level you're at. While I'm thinking about it, you know what I'm going to ask you to do right now. Like, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Help us out at Irish Breakdown. We've got, I know, Brian's got his shows regular tomorrow. Saturday morning, Vince and I have Countdown to Kickoff. Brian will jump in with Countdown to Kickoff as well for some of his analysis. And then, of course, after the game, there will be a post-game show. Sunday night, there will be kind of an end-of-the-week recap. And Labor Day, Vince and I will be here Monday. So whether you're at the beach or grilling or whatever you happen to be doing, take us with you because we'll still be doing the show Monday, rehashing everything that happened Saturday night between Notre Dame and Ohio State. So IB Nation Sports Talk will be here Monday. So mark that. Even if you don't get to watch it live, of course, you can go back and find the podcast. Little backyard brawl action tonight. West Virginia plays Pittsburgh. Pitt's -7.5. Penn State at Purdue at 8 o'clock. Nittany Lions -3.5 in that one. Again, going to talk to Chase Brown here in a minute. Marcus Freeman did his end of the week Zoom conference today, his first end of the week Zoom conference. Biggest piece of news to come out of that is the availability of left guard Jarrett Patterson. He is still questionable, according to Marcus Freeman. Still questionable is Jarrett Patterson with that sprained left foot. He says Patterson got some scout team reps this week, took some reps with the team as well, but they continue to evaluate that. He said they'd evaluate it again after practice today and after practice tomorrow. In the meantime, Rocco Spindler listed as the number 2 left guard behind Patterson on this week's depth chart. Also said Logan Diggs, Joe Wilkins, Deion Colsey, all available for Saturday's game. They all had different injuries at some point during training camp, but they'll all be available. Freeman's also going to take the team onto the field at Ohio Stadium tomorrow. And this was one of the first questions that got asked by an Ohio State reporter earlier today. Freeman said it is less a walkthrough and more just kind of a getting familiar with the setting. for his team. He said there's no personal emotion for him in returning to the place where he played college football. So he said, hey, I'm taking emotion out of it, which I think is good as well. I think the Ohio State people had a hard time believing that, but that's where they are. He also said, look for a lot of starter types on special teams. He said he wasn't sure off the top of his head who all they were going to be, but three guys he mentioned by name: Isaiah Foskey, Bo Bauer, Jordan Botelho. Obviously, Botelho not a starter, but again, he's got that. It's year 3, and we're still talking about potential with Botelho, but he has that kind of ability. But Foskey definitely, Bo Bauer, starter types. Notre Dame remains a 17.5-point underdog going into the game. Freeman said he brought it up with his team, but didn't necessarily hammer it home. It was more about preparation. That was like the recurring theme today. Preparation. So that's what it was all about. Over under 59.5 still for that. So with that, I'm not going to waste any more time. Promised an Ohio State breakdown, so let's do that right now. Bring in Chase Brown right now from 11warriors.com. He covers, of course, Ohio State football. How you doing today, Chase?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm preparing a little bit for the impending doom of a football season, but also I'm expecting it to be a lot of fun. Always being in the media, there's a sort of a dread and an excitement that the busiest time of your year is starting, but then also you get to cover the sport that you love. So I'm looking forward to it.
That's right. You come out of camp and you need to take a nap for a couple days and you jump right into the season. But, you got to do what you got to do, I guess. Before we talk specifically about Ohio State, I wanted to ask you about, this USC, UCLA, and just kind of how that went over there in Columbus. What folks in that part of the Big Ten country think about it.
Yeah, it was pretty abrupt. I remember I was sitting in an office with a couple of my coworkers, and we see this tweet from John Wilner come across our timelines. He was the first reporter to have the actual report that USC and UCLA were going to be leaving the Pac-12 and joining the Big Ten, and we weren't exactly sure what to do with it at first. We were like, well, can we trust this guy? It's somebody we hadn't really heard of before. But in our best interest, we saw, he has over 50,000 followers on Twitter. I'm sure it's way higher now. But we were like, okay, let's run with it. Let's see where it goes. And, soon enough, we see everybody else is running with it too. And eventually Ohio State sends a release out, and USC and UCLA send a release, as well as the Big Ten. And it just all kind of came into fruition very quickly. We ended up having a press conference the next day with Gene Smith, Ohio State's athletic director, and the president of the university, Christina Johnson, to kind of talk about that deal. And they're very excited for it. They're excited about the possibilities that it brings for Ohio State. And they're also looking forward to what it can do in growing the brand of the Big Ten and continuing to establish it as one of the premier conferences in college athletics.
Yeah, obviously, big shots, big ripple effects across college football. It's going to be really interesting to see how things shake out going forward. There's all that talk about Notre Dame and talk about other conferences as well that they might end up getting, or not other schools joining the conference, that they might get up to 20 here in the next few years. So I think everyone's going to be kind of everyone outside the Big Ten and the SEC will just kind of be sitting on their hands and a little bit of nerves over these next few years, waiting to see what the next kind of shoe to fall happens to be.
That's kind of what it feels like. I think that the Big Ten is putting itself in a good position to sort of be the other conference that maybe dukes it out with the SEC for television eyeballs. And they're putting together a conference that has a lot of top brands, especially in college football. It already had a pretty good standing when it comes to programs like Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State. Nebraska hasn't been very good recently, but the kind of football tradition, its rich history there. And adding a school like USC and adding a school like UCLA only continues to bring a football tradition to the conference. And I'm sure that they'll be looking for more schools down the line to be adding to the conference as well.
Yep. Ohio State, it's crazy when a 2-loss season ends up being one of your more disappointing seasons in recent memory, I guess. But that's kind of what they dealt with coming out of last year. What's Ryan Day's popularity level right now? Does he have any detractors? What's it like for him?
I wouldn't say he has any detractors, but I do think that there are people that want to see him deliver on winning a national championship. It's been a long time since Ohio State has um, hoisted that college football playoff trophy. Obviously, they were the first team to do it back in 2014, that 2014-15 season. The story behind that, it's probably one of the most well-told stories in college football history of having three quarterbacks play in that season and, having that third string quarterback lead Ohio State to a title. But I think Ryan Day is a coach that people around Columbus love. They love his offensive mind. They love that he has created a place where quarterbacks, high level quarterbacks, want to come play, and wide receivers as well. Brian Hartline's doing an incredible job recruiting that position. And I think that now this season, knowing that there is someone with experience like Jim Knowles handling the defense and the staff that he's brought in to help him, that Ohio State has expectations to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten championship, and to win a national title this season, to be one of the teams that'll be in the college football playoff, and then to eventually win it all.
If they're going to do that, of course, CJ Stroud is going to be a big part of it. He ended up having a great year last year, first year as a starter. I'm curious with him. They start off a little bit of a scare. They're trailing Minnesota at halftime, kind of turn it on in the second half. They end up winning. They lose to Oregon the next week. They beat Tulsa. I think he had 3 of his 4 interceptions in those first 3 games, though, last season. And it seems like not everyone maybe was completely sold on Stroud at that point. That's kind of the memory I have, just kind of thinking about some of the, the national bullet points and things like that. Is that fair to say at that point, where the way things started out?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that kind of came as a surprise to me. Looking at our message boards, at our forums, and seeing more than a few Ohio State fans sort of pushing the alarm and saying maybe Kyle McCord's better to lead this team. Maybe Jack Miller is somebody that should step in and lead this team and lead the offense. But, CJ Stroud, it took him some time to get acclimated with being the quarterback at Ohio State, but it should take anyone a good amount of time. It's one of the best programs in college football, and it's not that he was taking over initially against what we may consider a cupcake team. He had to go on the road to Minnesota, night game. There was some rain. So it didn't really start off against an opponent that he could get his feet wet and, kind of find his groove. It was, this is ready to go. You need to be ready to go playing against Minnesota. And then, week 2, they come back and play Oregon. So he was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit. And then against Tulsa, kind of lightened up a little bit. But then also he was been dealing with some shoulder injuries and some shoulder problems early in that season. It seemed that when they eventually rested him for the Akron game and he was able to heal up that shoulder, the rest of the season was just a trajectory unlike anything that we've seen from an Ohio State quarterback.
So as he comes into this season, I imagine he feels just like a completely different quarterback than the one at this time a year ago.
Absolutely. And Ryan Day has said as much. Last year leading into the season, almost every time we met with Coach Day, there was a question about who the starting quarterback was going to be. Now everyone just asks about what Ryan Day is seeing from CJ Stroud and what's made him the best quarterback in the country. And Ryan Day isn't quite ready to bestow that title on his quarterback, kind of trying to keep him hungry a little bit, but he knows the kind of special talent that he has in CJ Stroud and that there really is no bad thing that he can say about him. Just needs to continue to develop in his arm strength, continue to develop in his accuracy, and continue to be a more willing leader, which he has been this offseason. And he was the only unanimous pick to be a team captain for Ohio State this season. And it seems like he is responding to anything that Ryan Day has put in front of him.
Seems like as I look at this offense and I'm trying to find, okay, where are the real question marks? It seems like it's mostly depth issues. Like when like what's the depth going to be at running back or, whatever it happens to be. What do you think is the biggest question that they have to answer offensively?
Offensively, really, you're right. There aren't too many questions. There was one quote that offensive coordinator and tight ends coach Kevin Wilson had about Ohio State's ability to create push up front from their offensive line to really be talented in those short yard situations. It's a new look offensive line. There are 3 returning starters, but Paris Johnson, who started at guard last year, is kicking out to left tackle. So you're going to have an offensive line with Paris Johnson, Luke Whippler, and DeJuan Jones that are returning. But then you insert new guys like Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones, who Matthew Jones was someone that kind of was a rotation offensive lineman for Ohio State last season. So he does have some starting experience, but this will be the first time that he'll be relied on to be a guy that goes in every day and is going to be the starter for all 12 regular season games and beyond. So for Ohio State's offensive line, it really is getting that push up front and being able to establish the run game for guys like Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Dallin Hayden.
Defensively, a few more questions. I mean, obviously, when you change defensive coordinators and most of the defensive staff, you're going to have some questions. And probably from our end, we've beaten up the whole Michigan, Oregon, and the rushing totals and all that kind of stuff to death, from our end, looking at things. But they bring in Knowles. So how different do you expect them to look on the defensive side this year compared to last year?
I'm not quite sure yet. I think that Ohio State has done a pretty good job keeping exactly what that defense will look like this season under wraps. But from what I can tell, Jim Knowles is trying to create as much chaos defensively as possible. The word that a lot of the players have been using is multiple. Knowles wants this defense to be multiple in the sense that they're going to throw a lot of different coverages at opposing offenses, and they're going to rely heavily on that defensive line to get home, which is something that Ohio State hasn't done since really the departure of Chase Young in 2019. They need a defensive end. They need a defensive tackle that can really just be a disruptor up front. And I think they're really relying on those guys to create havoc for opposing quarterbacks and running backs. That way, when it gets to the next level of linebackers and safeties and cornerbacks, that those guys can be the ones making plays. Just a lot of chaos, a lot of hectic, helter-skelter kind of stuff. But I think Knowles has a good plan moving forward.
Well, and again, this is from the outside looking in, but like if they're going to rely that much on the defensive line, they obviously have some guys who are highly recruited, but they haven't necessarily, and some of them are young still, but they haven't necessarily played up to that level yet. It seems like a lot to rely on considering, like they just don't look like they've got the guy up front on that defensive line right now. What do you think?
I would agree. I think that you're kind of hoping that a guy like JT Tuimoloau or a guy like Jack Sawyer would step into that role as sophomores. Zach Harrison is somebody that came in as a highly recruited defensive end and a highly recruited edge rusher, but you haven't really seen him prove it through his first 3 seasons at Ohio State, and maybe that comes this season. It's something that he's looking forward to. But what you need to see out of those guys is somebody that can really be relied on, a very talented edge rusher that can get to the quarterback. It just seems like they've always been maybe a half second too late to getting that sack, to securing that takedown. So maybe guys like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are people that you're going to look to be those kind of game wreckers this season.
Jim Knowles, like you were talking about chaos and multiple, but he's also said that this is a safety-driven defense. And I'm curious, like, what does that actually mean? I haven't really seen it, put to paper, I guess. What does it mean to have a safety-driven defense?
It's a good question because I'm not really sure what it means either. I'm excited to see exactly what he's talking about when he brings something like that up. Ohio State uses 3 safeties, or Knowles uses 3 safeties in his scheme. There's 2 of the traditional, the free safety and the strong safety roles. But he has, these new look names like Rover and Bandit, sort of the bullet that Ohio State's been using in years past. But I think where the chaos comes is with those safeties, is that there's always going to be 3 safeties on the field. Now, where do you put them? Is there going to be a safety that's up closer to the line of scrimmage? Will there be one that lines up almost like a linebacker? Will there be one that's 15 to 20 yards off the ball down the field, providing coverage over the top? And I think what the chaos is that Jim Knowles is looking to put those different safeties in different spots so that a quarterback can never guess exactly what's coming. And that those safeties will be key to creating that chaos and allowing Ohio State to do some of the things defensively that might lead to some disruption for an opposing team's offense.
Well, and that's interesting in this matchup specifically because you've got a guy like Michael Mayer, who's obviously such a big part of Notre Dame's offense. And so I imagine those safeties are going to come into play when it comes to defending Michael Mayer Saturday night.
Yeah, and Noel said yesterday that, they understand that Michael Mayer is an elite tight end at the college football level and that he's going to be an NFL tight end. I'm not sure how you guys might break him down, but at least in my estimation, he's probably going to be the first at that position taken off the board in next year's NFL draft. So Ohio State's game planning heavily to be able to stop him. They understand that there's a first-year quarterback coming into the shoe, somebody that likes to run it a little bit more than they like to throw it. But when you have a big a target as Michael Mayer over the middle or running out into the flats, it gets pretty easy to throw him the football. So you're going to need to defend him heavily to make sure that part of the passing attack is not utilized as frequently as maybe they'd like to be.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, I mean, the Bowers kid from Georgia, there's a lot of love for him, but it just sure seems like, again, we get to see Michael Mayer every game. So we see what he's all about. If he's not the first, he'll be the second tight end off the board, I would think. I think they both have a really good chance to be first-round guys. But this first game, it is a first game. Neither one of these teams gets any kind of tune-up coming into this game. First game of the season. Does that, despite, Notre Dame is obviously a big underdog going into this game, like from your perspective as you sit and you look at this, are there enough unknowns to kind of make you go, well, I don't know, just because it is an opener?
I think so. I've kind of been uncertain what to think of the 17.5-point spread in favor of Ohio State, only really because it's the first game of the season. I understand that Ohio State fans are hungry, that, last season wasn't exactly what they wanted from their football team, and that 105,000 fans are going to be packed into Ohio Stadium on September 3rd. But, when it comes down to it, I think that this game will be more entertaining and probably closer than people might think. I'd like to say that Ohio State, at least right now, is a team that will cover the spread in most of their games this season, but I'm not sure about this one. I think Notre Dame has a lot to like, a lot that's unproven and a lot that can't really be scouted by Ohio State's coaching staff. And so I'll give them their credit where it's due. And I think that this game will be closer than maybe we expect.
Yeah. I mean, again, Ohio State had to get by Minnesota. Now, granted, they're in the same situation Notre Dame's in with a new first-year starting quarterback on the road and all that. But like Notre Dame last year goes to Florida State, and it wasn't a very good Florida State team. It wasn't a good Florida State team the year before, but it ends up being an overtime game that Notre Dame was, just able to get out of there with. It just seems like in college football with no preseason games, there's that element that can make things look a lot different than any of us think they're going to look. It's like, because we're basing most of the things on what we saw last year,
Right. And I think that if Notre Dame withstands maybe the initial punch from Ohio State's offense, let's say CJ Stroud comes out and leads an opening drive and scores a touchdown, maybe gets the crowd into it, but then Notre Dame comes back down on the very next drive and scores a touchdown to tie it up, then I think we know what this game will look like. I think that people are expecting Ohio State to maybe be the better team here, as indicated by the line. But I do think that Notre Dame, you need to put some respect on the fact that they're the number 5 team in the country. They have the respect of AP voters, of the coaches poll. So there needs to be that kind of respect for them. And that if Notre Dame comes into this game and responds well, especially in those opening moments, I think that we're going to be in for a good one.
Will this season, from an Ohio State perspective, will it be seen as a failure if they're not at least in the national championship game, if not winning the national championship?
I think so. And I think that that's kind of become the expectation, sort of the floor for Ohio State football is to make the college football playoff. I'm not sure if really you'd say the national championship is the floor since the turn of becoming the college football playoff. You'd like to think so, but also Ohio State has been to the college football playoff more times than not. But then also they've played for a national championship only twice. In 2014, they ended up winning over Oregon. In 2020, they lost to Alabama. So you would think that this Ohio State team has expectations to go all the way. So I do think that would be a failure in the mind of the coaching staff and in the mind of the fans if they don't end up hoisting a national championship trophy this year.
So finish this sentence for this game. For Notre Dame to make a game out of it, this has to happen.
That's a great question. I would say win the turnover battle. If Notre Dame's defense, I look at guys like Isaiah Foskey as a playmaker in this game. If he can, cause a turnover with a forced fumble, turn that into a short field advantage for Notre Dame's offense to score and maybe take the lead. There's some guys on Notre Dame's defense that are playmakers, and I think that if they can win the turnover battle and that they can force Stroud or Henderson or Williams into some turnovers, that could change the game drastically.
All right. Chase Brown, 11warriors.com. Great stuff from you, Chase. Appreciate having you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Absolutely. All right, so some interesting stuff there from Chase, and that last, as I turned my microphone back up since we had some issues earlier, that last part there about the turnovers, I think that a lot of people would probably agree with that, or at least I agree with that Notre Dame probably needs to win the turnover margin. Vince and I were talking last night. I think +2 at least Notre Dame needs to be in turnovers, potentially +3, either that or, like +2, and one of them is a pick six, or at least puts them in great opportunity to score, that kind of thing, like big game-changing, momentum-changing type plays. So we shall see. We got it coming up Saturday in Columbus. And right now, bringing in the one and only, everyone's favorite, Bobby Hensley.
Not your favorite, but that's okay.
Well, that's a given. Just in time for rapid fire. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's do it. You sound like you're in an echo chamber there tonight.
Yeah, well, maybe it is a little bit echoey. I'll talk quieter.
Oh, that's all right. We've all got microphone issues. I think it's one of those days today. So Bruce Feldman recently said he thinks Notre Dame's game against Ohio State will be like playing in a 3-point shooting contest against Steph Curry for the Irish. He predicts a 45-24 Ohio State win. Do you buy or sell that?
I think I sell it because I don't like the comparison. And you can't compare a 3-point shootout to a football game anyway. I get his point. There's a lot of offense and that they're overmatched. But I don't agree with him saying that there's a reason why Notre Dame's a top 5 team. For better or for worse, right now the rankings came out. You got to believe they're going to put up a fight and be in this game. I think Notre Dame, the thought that they can't play in the big game, it's not really fair because some of the big games they were playing in were against Alabama and Clemson, who were the best teams in the country. So at that point, I think that Notre Dame's going to be able to I think they're going to be able to hang tight with them and at least play a good game because I think they've closed the gap on the upper level talent in the country than they have been in the previous years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's saying that using the Steph Curry analogy, that Notre Dame is shooting 2-pointers down in the low post and Steph Curry is just out there bombing threes. So you're trading 2 for 3s all over the place. I don't buy it because I think that, again, the picture most people nationally especially have of this Notre Dame team is one that had a problem running the football last year. The offensive line was not good, and also of a Tyler Buchner who was basically just in there to be a bit of a glorified running back for the most part last year, who would throw every now and then. He's a much more fully developed quarterback. He's not just going to run around out there. And with some of the targets that he has, Lorenzo Styles, for example, Braden Lindsey, for example, guys who can get deep. Jaden Thomas is a guy with some deceptive speed who has some size as well. And of course, you got Michael Mayer out there. Between those guys, between the fact, again, they're going to have to win the turnover margin or at least push in that department and not have any game-changing plays go against them. But they are going to have to run the football. They're going to have to control it to an extent. I'm not saying that they've just got to ram the ball down Ohio State's throat. They have to have a legitimate running game, but they also get that. And especially all it's going to take is Tyler Buchner to catch Ohio State off guard once or twice with the arm that he has, because he has a legitimate arm. And again, he has legitimate receiving options. All it's going to take is him to catch them off guard once or twice, and then be able to mix in the running ability that he has, plus Audric Estime and Tyree and these guys. I just don't see it running away like guys like Bruce Feldman and so many other people think that it's going to get away from Notre Dame that quickly.
And not only them, but FanDuel and DraftKings, all the spreads keep growing, and I don't get that.
Yeah.
I think Notre Dame, the thing is that you talk about turnovers. There's no way you can quantify the stat, but just mistakes in general. Like maybe it's not a turnover, but maybe Notre Dame has a shot at an easy interception and drops it or something like that. They have to play better or closer to their level of talent than Ohio State maybe does, but that doesn't mean they can't. And the level of talent's not that big. Ohio State they've had the better program for a while. And what a fun game to open up with in general. How awesome they're not opening up with Marshall. They have this big matchup right away. So but to run away with it, and maybe Ohio State has strengths over Notre Dame. That's the goal. You want to be better than your opponent. But I don't think that it's trading threes for twos and losing points all across and bleeding out the whole game like he says.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question the secondary is going to have to step up to the challenge, and everyone's worried about Clarence Lewis. I think Tariq Bracy is probably the key in this game. The guy in the nickel, how much does he play on Jackson Smith and Jiba? He had like 70-some catches out of the slot last year. So how much is Tariq Bracy solely responsible for him, and do they move Smith and Jiba around, and does Bracy follow, that kind of thing? I don't, Clarence Lewis is going to be a factor for sure, but so are those freshmen. And I think that one of the key guys in this whole matchup is going to end up being Tariq Bracy and what kind of defense that he can play. So,
and it's always interesting because it's like, as a defensive person, defensive minded, it's like, well, how am I going to let you beat me? And so they get to pick how they want to do it. It's like, if you can stop this guy. Now, is the running game going to be more important? Is there going to be more throwing? You get to control that kind of. If you put, if you're in goal line defense and obviously they're going to throw more, but, and finding the middle ground there. So it'll be interesting to see the chess match and the coaching, which is a complete question mark for Notre Dame right now, a new head coach. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops during the game. But I still think that there's no way the game's going to be 20 points or more, like they're kind of saying on all the apps and the national pundits are saying.
Vegas, baby. Vegas. That's right.
So
Ohio State has more experience, but Notre Dame has more unknowns that Ohio State is going to have to try to prepare for. Which do you think is the bigger advantage for either team? The fact that Ohio State has the experience, or that Notre Dame does have these unknown components like a Tyler Buchner and what exactly he can do in the passing game and the offensive line and those kind of things?
I think you're right. I think it's both. Both of them are positives, but I'd say that Ohio State has the experience edge here, and that means more than the unknowns. So the unknowns could be anything, but if it was a mediocre team, the experience wouldn't matter as much. But the fact that it's Ohio State and they've been good for a long time, I think that all that experience really does add up to be a good thing. If it was a lesser opponent, then the experience wouldn't matter as much, and the unknown would be a bigger edge, because just because it's an unknown doesn't mean it's a negative. It's not like last year either, where we knew the unknown was the offensive line, but it wasn't an unknown. We just knew it wasn't good. There's a big difference. So I would say right now, looking at this matchup, I would definitely put the Ohio State experience as more of a positive than Notre Dame's unknown, but I think they're both good things for both programs, both teams coming into the game. And who really wins are the fans.
Right. Well, and I think the biggest experience factor is just the quarterback.
Sure.
Tommy Rees has talked about Tyler Buchner played at Virginia Tech. Yeah, that's something. And he's played in obviously, again, in small parts in these games like USC and North Carolina.
The package.
It's important that he at least got on the field last year. I do believe that. So he doesn't just go out there with rubber legs and, looks around in the stadium, looks 5 times bigger, than it actually is, and that kind of thing. You just getting swallowed up by the moment. But at the same time, there's still, again, like pretty much everything that Tyler Buchner did when he came off the bench last year was a predetermined play from the sideline. It was like, you're going to do this. And now he's actually going to have to see what happens pre-snap, move his protections around. How many timeouts is Tyler Buchner going to have to burn? Like, if he's not burning through timeouts in the first half, I think he's in pretty good shape probably out there. But little things like that, like when you're talking about a quarterback in CJ Stroud, who was in the exact same situation last year, that position specifically, I think it weights in that direction. But like I was thinking about last year, Notre Dame going to Ohio State or to Florida State in that season opener, everyone from Florida State, because of what Notre Dame was in 2019, I guess that would have been 2020, actually, like they all thought that they were going to be this power running team that was going to try to ram the ball down their throat. Well, that's not how it turned out, because the offensive line was not good. It turned out Jack Cohn had a career passing day that day. And again, like if you look at Notre Dame on film from a year ago, you see a pretty soft offensive front. The offensive line is not much, but as we have seen when we've been able to lay our eyes on it during training camp, that's going to be different this year. So, that's kind of what got me thinking about this. The experience versus the unknowns. I think the most important position on the field is the quarterback. And so because of that, I think that there's some things that Notre Dame's going to be able to do that Ohio State will not be ready for. But that experience at the quarterback position is going to be huge.
I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying, but it's not only as the quarterback position. That's obviously the most important. That's the CEO on the field, right?
Yeah.
But the head coach is also a question mark. And you talked about how it's good that Buchner had some games last year and was able to, get used to the stage, I guess is a good way to put it. But Freeman coaching in that bowl game, I know they threw him in a BCS bowl game, and that's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
How good is it that he has one game under his belt, because that game didn't go so great for Notre Dame, but he has a game under him. So at least he's been the head coach for one game before he starts his head coaching debut, which is weird as it sounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it helps him. I think that having that experience let him know some things that he needed to evaluate and work more on to try to prepare for in the offseason. Again, there's nothing like actually going out there and having to make decisions in 40-second intervals on a football field as a head coach. But, you're exactly right about that. That inexperience is big as well. But at the same time, he's a smart guy. He's got a good staff around him. Ryan Day was in that situation before, right, just a few years ago. Lincoln Riley was in that situation just a few years ago. So it's not like other high-profile coaches haven't been able to come in, become a first-time head coach, and have success. It's just that now you're in a primetime environment right off the bat. You're not getting Marshall and UNLV to start off the season.
Well, so I also think it's important. Like, I'm kind of going off the rails here a little bit because it's not about experience anymore.
Well, that never happens.
Ohio State, I think they took a step backwards last year from where they had been with their tradition of excellence. So I think they have some question marks as well.
It's like I was just talking to Chase Brown. It's amazing when losing 2 games is considered taking a step backwards.
Well, it's different for them because they haven't been playing all these marquee games off their schedule, off of the conference schedule. Yeah. So to lose to Michigan, that's different because I don't know if the Big Ten as a whole is as good as people think. So if they took even a small step back, because they lost to Michigan, and that means something. Yeah. They haven't lost to them in how long? So I think there's still a little bit of question marks. Are they trending steady, up, or down? And I feel like they're a little bit down, and I think a part of it's Ryan Day. How many years has he been there now? This is his third or
fourth year.
Fourth year. So I just wonder if they're still going to be at that level that they were, 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm not saying they're bad by any means, and I understand why they're favorites. I just think that gap of the spread is just so big, and I don't think it's going to be the blowout people think.
Yep.
The national people.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you agree with this statement? Notre Dame will beat Ohio State if it rushes for at least 200 yards against the Buckeyes.
I agree with that pretty high. I'd say 8 out of 10, because that means that you're melting the clock, you're limiting possessions, you're finding your wheelhouse. Because if you get to 200 yards, that means it's working. If you're at 27 yards rushing at halftime on 27 carries, you're not going to keep doing it.
Right.
So I think that indicates there was some level of success. So I would say that there is a good shot that means Notre Dame's winning.
Yeah. You nailed it right there. If you're over 200 yards rushing, it's not because you're at the end of the game and you're down by 2 touchdowns and you're still trying to grind out some yards, because you're, and again, I'm not saying that number does not mean that they're not going to be throwing the ball as well. I mean, like if they're at 200 yards rushing, I could easily see them 2 to 250 passing as well, and Tyler Buchner having a big game all the way around. So I agree. I'm around an 8 as well. If they are up around that number, it's going to be, that means it will have been a very good night for Notre Dame because of what you said. You're not going to keep running the ball if you're not in the game. So I would stick with that as well.
It's always amazing when we agree. I think a better question is 1 to 10, what are the odds you think that they have 200 yards rushing at the end?
Yeah, and I just don't know, because like even asking Chase Brown what he thinks this defense is going to be, he's not sure. I think that they can at least be in the 160 range, and even that would still be a pretty good night if they're in that 160 type range, 150, 160 against these guys. Because, again, okay, so yeah, Knowles was brought in to revamp a defense that got gouged a couple of times last year, and really got gouged by Utah as well, for that matter, in the Rose Bowl, even though they ended up winning that game by a field goal. But, Michigan and Oregon gouged them. There's a lot of questions on their defensive line. I would give a slight advantage to Notre Dame's offensive line. Now, again, like we can, having been there at practice, we can see what the improvements are with Notre Dame's offensive line. We haven't been there at Ohio State practice, so we don't know what that defensive line looks like. The defensive line and the linebackers were both average last year. And Knowles' defense is more focused around the secondary. It's safety driven, as he likes to say. So I think that is all good for Notre Dame. So I think that they've at least got a chance to be in that 160-ish range. And again, if they're in the game, they can be pushing potentially that 200 by the time it's all said and done.
So you always do this to me, so I'm going to do it to you. So the answer to my question was 1 to 10. How confident are you that Notre Dame can get to 200 yards?
Can get to 200. I would say I'll give it a 6.5, 7.
Wow, that's pretty high. That's higher than I would give. But
to me, that so like, what would you give? So you're like in the 4 or 5 range?
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. 4.5 to 5, because it's a coin flip, right? There's so many unknowns about the first game of the year anyway. And that's what I kind of enjoy about it. But I think they have a shot at doing that. And like you say, then, so you're almost saying that you think they're going to win. Because if you're at a 7 or an 8 that they can get to that number, and you said that 8 means that they win, so you're pretty high on a chance for Notre Dame victory.
I think they're going to be in the game. I still, as of right now, have Ohio State winning, but I do think they're going to be in the game in the fourth quarter.
That comment's pretty telling as well, because those rushing yards, a lot of them are going to come from the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And it's not just scrambling to make a throw. He has the ability to run, which is a little bit different than what we've been used to for Notre Dame.
Right. So we've been talking about Jim Knowles, and I said this yesterday. It ain't like Jim Knowles' Buddy Ryan. This ain't the 46. Pardon my ain'ts, but you know what I'm saying. This ain't the 46 defense of Buddy Ryan and the Chicago Bears. He's a good defensive coordinator, and yeah, he's got better talent at Ohio State that he's had at his other stops before. Who has more pressure on him, though? Marcus Freeman for Notre Dame or Jim Knowles for Ohio State?
There's only one way that you could say Knowles has any pressure on him more than Freeman. It's because if he fails, he'll never be a head coach ever and never move up the ladder and keep succeeding. That's the only way, because obviously the buck stops and starts with the head coach. I guess you could say if Freeman fails, Like they could give him an out where if you fire all your coordinators and bring new people in, you could get a different shot. I don't know.
I'm not saying somebody's going to be fired after the game,
No.
like that kind of pressure.
Yeah, the plane's going to leave the tarmac and the coach will still be. No, it has to be the head coach, especially a rookie head coach. You don't ever see a guy that's in charge of a program, and if they fail, feel comfortable. Coordinators can still find their way around and move around, but you only get so many shots as a head coach at a pristine program like this. And you look at Bob Davie. He left and he ended up in New Mexico. You don't get shots the big time like this as a head coach very often. Yeah. So he's the one that has the pressure, in my opinion.
Yeah. To an extent, I agree with what you're saying because this is very high profile and it is his alma mater and he has deflected that. And I think it's good that he has deflected that. He's trying to keep emotion out of it as much as possible and keep the attention on the players. I lean a little bit, especially because it's a home game. Like Jim Knowles, again, I'm sitting here saying he's not Buddy Ryan, and he's not. But at the same time, he was essentially brought in to get these guys over the hump and at least into the college football playoff, if not winning a national championship this year. And if you lose at home right off the bat, the odds go against that pretty quickly. Now, they're not going to completely fall out of the championship picture, just like Notre Dame. If it's a close game either way, like I said before, both of these teams are going to be in it. This is, again, everything you see, this is a complicated defense. So I have a hard time thinking that he's just going to completely revamp this in game one, again, with some unknowns that he's going to be facing on the other side of the ball. So I think I can see what you're saying with Marcus Freeman because he is the head coach, but I lean a little bit more toward Jim Knowles in this matchup. Like if you said for the season, like in this matchup, because again, he was brought in to be the change for Ohio State, like the big change for Ohio State. And they look at this as national championship or bust type season. So I think there's a little bit more pressure on him going into this one.
Yeah, but I think here's the deal. The defensive coordinator is in charge of defense.
I get what you're saying. I know
so
what you're
like
saying.
At the end of the game, if Notre Dame were to win, 2-0, Notre Dame might look terrible but the defense for Ohio State could look great and it might not be their fault they lost. So I'm saying that
but go back to what we're talking about. If Notre Dame does hit that 200-yard mark or even 190 or whatever, and Tyler Buckner's running wild and Audric Estime's hitting some plays and, all this different stuff, it's not going to be a good-looking night for Jim Knowles at the end of the night.
No, and you know what I'm getting out of? It's kind of Van Gorder vibes for Notre Dame.
Thinking the same thing.
And, and how did that work out?
I've been avoiding saying that. I've been avoiding letting it trip off my tongue. But.
Oh, well, I'm glad I got to be your scapegoat then.
Yes.
It's almost like who has more pressure in this show, you or me? I'm joking. I just think the head coach, especially a rookie head coach, I know he's a rookie and he coached one game and he's been around football his whole life, but I just think there's so much more there and so much, and it's such, again, just what a matchup to start. There's so many storylines. There's so much you can dissect and talk about. It's kept us going almost all off season leading up to this game. We're finally here. I just think that a defensive coordinator could have a bad game or grow more later. I know what you're saying. You're saying for this game, I'm still going to put it on the head because maybe at the end of the game, I just see more failure points for a head coach to call a timeout at the wrong time or challenge a wrong play or call a wrong play on either side of the ball because you have two times to make the chances, offense and defense.
Right.
Versus just a defensive guy who could have a great game. His guys could have a great game, and it still might not matter. So it's always an interesting dynamic because you have offense versus defense. If offense is good, defense is bad. But obviously everybody's trying to be the best they can. So that's what makes sports fun in general and competition. I just think that I
agree with what Michael is saying here in the chat. Knowles will have a very good defense at Ohio State given his track record and the raw talent he has, but I'll be shocked if we see that in game one.
So how lovely to play them game one.
Yeah, exactly. I've been saying it all along, like the element of this being a season opener and there being unknowns. Go back to the blue gold game. I said it wasn't the worst thing in the world that Tyler Buckner didn't play in the blue gold game. So, because it was it was televised and nobody got a chance to see any glimpse of what a Tyler Buckner offense would look like. So, not the worst thing in the world at all. All right, the College Football Playoffs Board of Managers is going to meet Friday to possibly vote to expand the playoff. It's an 11-member board that's composed of a university president from each of the FBS conferences as well as Notre Dame. They would need a unanimous vote to expand the playoff before the current contract expires in 4 years. 2025 is the final year of the contract. So, according to the initial report in SI, many of the school's presidents are frustrated over the previous attempts by conference commissioners to vote to expand the playoff. So, scale of 1 to 10, what chance do you give the presidents to actually expand the playoffs early when they vote Friday?
When they vote this Friday, I think it's a coin flip. I'd say 5. I think it's coin flip. It just sounds like a lot of pettiness. Like, we just don't want to vote it in because, other people have wanted it at different times. But the bottom line is always going to be the money. And there's more money to be in a bigger playoff. So I think that's the driving force that I think will make it happen.
Yes.
I think that'll outrank any pettiness that comes from a meeting, and they're just going to see that money. And how can you turn it down when you could have hundreds more million if you double it or whatever?
See, it's funny because it's usually the presidents pushing the academics and, how are we going to deal with the academics and juggling extra games in December and all this different stuff.
Say that.
The athletic directors, the conference commissioners, they couldn't get anything. Conference commissioners, I should say, they couldn't get anything done when they voted on it because it had to be unanimous. Everyone had their own agenda they were trying to set. And now the way things are rolling with USC and UCLA jumping to the Big Ten and all this other talk about teams jumping ship and, swapping conferences and all this different stuff, I think the university presidents are stepping in and going, look, just let us handle this. Because if they were to expand, what they're talking about is potentially getting this expanded to 12 teams by 2024. So we're talking about just basically 3 seasons from now. It would be 2024 and 2025. The key to the whole thing is it's got to be unanimous vote to do it early. There's going to be some kind of expanded playoff in the future, but the new contract that starts in 2026, if they don't expand before 2025, the new one that starts in 2026, all they have to have is a simple majority, and they'll go with whatever format they decide. I think, again, because it has to be unanimous, that's my biggest hang up. So I think you said like a 5. I would say 6, maybe a little bit more confident, but it's just the fact that it has to be unanimous to get this expanded early. But I think you nailed it again. They're going to see the dollar signs, a potential $450 million that can be spread all over the place if they do it in 2024. And I think that is, again, it's what it's all about.
Well, you said about unanimous, and that's the key. That's the cog in the whole situation here. But I could see one president holding out just to be petty. Like I keep bringing up that word, and I just feel like unless there's the only thing that's lucrative for everyone, obviously, is the money. But I could see maybe somebody, just one person holding out just to be that pain so that it doesn't happen, and they can make that their stand and like, well, I cared more about the competition and their players and the athletes or something crap. They can make something up. I could see the pettiness come out. So I hope that it doesn't happen. And I hope that if it's all but one, come on, let's just all make money here. Why wouldn't they want that? And it helps everyone, I think, right? It helps the fans, helps the tournament, helps everything. Because right now, I think the 4-team playoff is kind of a disaster because those semifinal games are not good to watch.
Don't forget, like I just saw this. Where'd that comment go? D-Hawk said, if they keep the last agreement that Notre Dame drops to the number 5 seed, even if they finish ranked 1 through 4, it may be time to join a conference. I think the vote doesn't expand to anything at this point. No, it might not expand anything at this point. But as to the first comment, you've got to remember right now, They only take the top 4. What's going to help Notre Dame stay independent is if the playoff expands to 12, because
Then
that's
you have
more
more of an
opportunities.
avenue in, yeah.
Jack Swarbrick basically said, I don't care what seed we are. If it goes to 12 teams, we've got more opportunities to be in the playoff in any given year. And that's what he's working for. See, he's willing to concede, one of those top 4 seeds. And, let's face it, they've had 8 years of the playoffs so far. They've made it twice. They've been in the top 4 twice. So, but they've been a top 10 team just about every other year. So they would have been in the playoff, I think. This is just off the top of my head. It's like all but 1 or 2 years, I think, at this point. So, 2 or 3, I guess, going back 8 years. But still, my point is, like the last 5 years, they would have been probably in the playoff pretty much every year. Like those last 5 years of Brian Kelly. And again, that's why Jack Swarbrick was willing to give up. Like, even if they're ranked second, they would still take the number 5 seed, because in the long term, it allows them to maintain the independence, because there are all the extra potential, all the extra opportunities to make it into the playoff with a 12-team field.
There's far more ways for them to make it with a 12-team field.
Absolutely.
And I think you almost can build your program quicker that way, because instead of being ranked 6th and not making the playoffs, you can say like, hey, we were 9th, but we made the playoffs. And if you win 1 or 2 games, you get further, you get more notoriety. I think that, for recruiting purposes, I think just making the playoff could help you build better if you just get a win or 2 here or there in the playoffs. So Notre Dame specifically should want it to expand as rapidly as possible. I think every team should. I think the only teams that won't want it to, like in a pure competitive way, would be the SEC, Alabamas of the world, because they're like, well, we're already going to be in the top 4. We're already God's gift to college football, so we're going to be in the top 4 anyway. So why would they want it to expand? So,
yeah. Chi-Town says an 8-team playoff would make so much more sense. With 12, you end up with 3 lost teams, and you might, but at the same time, an 8-team format might be better, but they're basically going to 12 or nothing at this point. It's going to end up being 12, so it doesn't matter like what we think would be better. It's going to end up being 12 at some point, whether it's before the contract ends or not.
How fun would this conversation have been to have in like 1999, when it's barely even 1 and 2 get to play each other?
I know. Yeah.
And then you would have said, no, we don't need 4. That's too many, because then you're going to have a 1-loss team saying that they deserve to be in, because if you have 2 undefeateds, they're 1 and 2, like the Texas USC year. So the loss thing, I think we get over in time. We get used to it, because, like I said, we expanded from nothing to 1 versus 2 to now 4. And I didn't hear people clamoring there might be a 2-loss team in a playoff to expand it to 4, to 4 even.
Yeah. I'm just looking at some of these other comments. Let's
good chat tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There was one that I was just looking at. Oh, here it was from Zachary. Do you think it'd be worth it if we have an away game every year in the playoff to stay independent? Well, if you're the 5 seed, you're going to get a home game. Like if you're the 5, like 5 would host. I think a 5 seed is going to get to host a game. Those higher, the top 4 teams would get a bye, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8, I think, would all be hosting like the 9, 10, 11, and 12 teams in that first round. So if you're one of the top 5, 6, top 8 teams, you're either going to get a bye if you're the top 4, and then that next group is going to get buys. So, and again, sometimes you're not, but you're still going to get revenue from being in the playoffs, and that's what everybody wants.
The bottom line. We're nitpicking here what the best system would be.
Yeah, and Tommy says Brian's idea is awesome. You're right, but again, they're not going to do that. Brian's idea is you play the bowls and then you do the selection for the playoff. I like it too, but that's not what they're going to do. So,
no, and then you really are talking about a really long season,
right?
Going all the way to almost February,
right? Okay, so tonight's Purdue-Penn State Thursday game was part of the trade that sent Joe Buck from Fox to ESPN. So was it worth the trade?
For ESPN or Fox? I don't
pick.
see. I don't see how it's worth it. I mean, part of the trade, the other part of the trade is Notre Dame and Ohio State, right? That was the other part of it.
No, it would have been that was initially talked about, but it ended up being Penn
Just this
State
game. I
Purdue
thought it was
instead.
okay. Well, then no,
Yeah.
it's definitely not worth
No.
it. No, not even close to
ESPN
worth it.
ABC got to keep that Ohio State game, basically.
Yeah, that's definitely not worth it then. I don't. Joe Buck getting out of his contract and going over there, that's good for him. I'm happy he got to make the move and was he getting 16 mil a year or something stupid?
Yeah.
But no, any game involving Purdue isn't worth a trade for anything. That could be on the Big Ten network and no one would care. It doesn't matter.
I mean, exactly. It should be on the Big Ten network for that matter, but it's going to be on Network Fox. And, like when you look at, this is the kind of game, for example, that NBC is going to have in that primetime package they're going to be getting in a few years. This is exactly the kind of game that you're going to get. Purdue
and that'll be a good get for them.
Yeah, like you might have one good team, and then you're going to have a middling Purdue type team. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it either. They had to give up something. They weren't. ESPN wasn't going to completely stand in Joe Buck's way. They were trying to work with him, so they're like, we'll give this up. That
we'll give up this layup for nothing.
Yeah. On the subject of Joe Buck, fill in the blank. Buck says he'll probably never call a baseball game again, and it'll be blank if that actually happens.
Well, it's like what D-Hawk said. He goes, I like Joe Buck announcing baseball, but he's frustrating in football. People love him as a baseball announcer.
Well, so let's not go too far. I don't know about that.
I mean, I think
because it's usually when the World Series rolls around that most of the Joe Buck hate comes around. Sure. Oh, Joe Buck hates my team because he got excited because somebody else hit a home run on the other team.
I think it's okay that he doesn't do baseball anymore because to me, the part that was weird is like he doesn't call a lot during the season and then he just pops up at the biggest games.
Yeah.
And that's a weird vibe. Like I want him all the way along during the year or doing a weekly or a couple games here and there. So that always bugged me. So I'm okay with him not doing baseball anymore. It's his roots. It's where his dad was. It's where he came from. I get that. He's a voice of the World Series for how long? But it also depends who they replace him with. Because if they replace him and the guy's terrible.
Well, it's Joe Davis. Do you know who Joe Davis is? He's the Dodgers voice.
Yeah. But I'm saying like in that big stage, who knows how he's going to interact. And he's a Dodgers guy. So you're going to get the same kind of hate that Buck does for Cardinals or whatever.
Yeah. I'm going to miss Joe Buck doing baseball. I think he's a good baseball announcer. Again, I know a lot of people. There's a lot of people who aren't going to agree with that. And if you watch baseball at all, you get so used to watching your local announcers. It's mostly local announcers during the season. Then it gets to the playoffs, and you're used to your local announcers getting excited at everything your team does and not being excited at every team the other team does. And then when you get network announcers, they're getting excited when big plays happen regardless. And that's when you get the whole Joe Buck hates my team and all that kind of stuff, because they're getting excited at stuff that you're not used to people getting excited about when you're watching TV. I'm going to miss it. I think at some point, probably somewhere down the line, he calls a game or two. He's still going to be at ESPN. That doesn't mean he's going to do a full schedule, but I would think that he'll jump in there and do something down the line.
I could see him doing the Sunday night game with them and starting and being in that booth maybe.
Yeah.
During the summer or big matchups or something. But the thing is I'm okay because I want to hear him do Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with him not doing baseball for a week that I get to hear a whole season Monday Night Football with Joe Buck.
I think it's going to be good to have that Monday night booth, like that real legitimate Monday night booth that we probably haven't had since Michaels and Madden were doing it, before everything kind of switched up. Aikman and Buck doing Monday Night Football is going to be a lot different sound, I think.
It's going to be weird seeing the graphics of ESPN with their voices because you just get used to Fox and like the Megatron animation they have and all the music and stuff, and now it's going to be all ESPN stuff.
Bobby, what do you consider to be the 2 worst sports months of the year?
See, I'm thinking about this, and I kind of think I'm going to put August and December as my 2 picks.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to do 2 summer months because I really do like baseball because you get something every night if you want it. It's nice outside, so you don't need sports as much. But August is dry. It's rough. You get baseball, and if your team's out of it already by August, and I don't like December. There's the holidays. You get the college football bowl season, but that means less and less every year. So I think, and then you still have hockey and basketball, but they're still new enough that you're not really watching the playoff race or anything. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say December, and I know December is not a popular pick. And you're going to say July and August.
No, I'm not. July for sure. I think everyone can agree that July probably is. I heard someone else today from the sports world say that we just ended the 2 worst sports months of the year. Like, I don't think that August is, because one, like from our perspective, that's when training camp starts for Notre Dame, and we're here and we're talking about Notre Dame every day. So there are a lot of things to talk about. The month of August just freaking flew right by, and it's because we had things to talk about once again. And even if we weren't specifically covering Notre Dame, you've got, the Pornsters are just coming hard tonight.
I wouldn't. Okay.
3rd block tonight. that might need to be edited in the long run, but yeah. My point is, like, NFL preseason, NFL training camps, all that stuff. My initial thought was May and July. I'm just not that thrilled about May, but I realize there's a lot of NBA fans and all that stuff, and you got NBA playoffs. And like even in December, like you say, December, you've got NFL regular seasons coming into the home stretch, with teams fighting for the playoffs and all that stuff. I'm going to stick with my gut instinct and say May. I'm not that thrilled with May. June is a little bit better because then, like, you have the finals, like the NBA playoffs and the Stanley Cup and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to say May and July.
Living in Indiana and the stuff that I like, though, I can't say May because that's when the Indy 500 is. You get Memorial Day. You get a lot of stuff like that. April's, I disagree on that.
Be right. It might be a little bit more. Yeah, I might lean into April a little bit more, even though that's like the start of baseball.
No, you get the NCAA championship games always in April. March Madness ends in April, and the Masters is in April.
Still, it's like you associate the tournament with March more.
Well, the Masters is enough to keep a month going.
I don't know about that.
The Indy 500 can't keep May going for you. I guess the Masters can't do April.
Jason says February and March. February might, well, but
February
again,
has the Super Bowl.
College basketball kind of kicking in. Yeah, and you've got the Super Bowl now and all that kind of. I think we can all agree on July. It's just a matter of what you prioritize.
Well, plus
outside of that, which month you're going to pick.
The only sport that's going on in July that we're going to really cover is baseball, and they even take a week off. So
right.
So obviously July's a layup.
Yep. Bobby, that is going to do it for tonight, and that is going to do it for the week. We've got Notre Dame and Ohio State Saturday, and that means Saturday morning, Vince and I will have the IB Countdown to Kickoff show from 10 until noon. Brian Driscoll will be jumping in for a couple of different segments with us as well. It'll mostly be Vince and I with Brian kind of jumping in on a couple of different segments, and then, of course, they'll have a post-game show afterwards along with Ryan and Sean, the other Sean, and then there'll be a show Sunday night as well. So we've still got tons of podcasts, live podcasts coming up in and around Ohio State, but this is going to be our final show before Saturday night's game. So we'll find out. We'll all be back here next week to see how it all unraveled or how it all went down.
One team will be 1-0 and one will be 0-1.
That's right. Thanks for joining us. Remember, hit that like button, subscribe, rate, review, and all that good stuff. Bobby, I will talk to you next week. And we will talk to you next week as well. IB Nation Sports Talk.